The Australian horror film Wolf Creek hits theatres with an opening title card claiming it's based on true events. 3 backpackers, Ben, Liz, and Christy, are stranded in the remote Australian outback when their car breaks down. A friendly bushman named Mick Taylor offers to help them, towing their vehicle back to his mining camp to fix it. But Mick isn't who he seems. What follows is 90 minutes of torture, brutality, and terror that left audiences traumatized. The film became a cult classic and launched a franchise. But how much of it is actually true? The answer is disturbing. While the specific story is fictional, Mick Taylor was inspired by 2 real serial killers who hunted backpackers in the Australian wilderness. Ivan Milotte, known as the Backpacker Killer, murdered at least 7 tourists in the 1990s, and Bradley John Murdoch killed British tourist Peter Falconio in 2001. Today, we're re-breaking down the true stories behind Wolf Creek. And trust me, reality is somehow even more horrifying than the movie. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Wolf Creek is one of the most brutal horror films ever made, and it's terrifying precisely because elements of it actually happened. So what's real and what's Hollywood? Who are Ivan Milotte and Bradley Murdoch? And why does Australia have such a dark history with backpacker murders? Let's dive in. First, let's be clear about what's fiction. The characters of Ben, Liz, and Christy are completely made up. They never existed. The specific events in the film, the car breaking down at Wolf Creek Crater, Mick Taylor torturing them at his mining camp, the elaborate escapes, all fictional. Mick Taylor himself is a fictional composite character, but the inspiration, that's disturbingly real. Director Greg McLean admitted that 2 stories, the cases of Ivan Milotte and Bradley John Murdoch, inspired the movie. McLean told Starburst magazine, the true story element of it is where he began, in one sense, in the sense that he's a combination of Bradley Murdoch and Ivan Milotte. So it's combined elements of those true characters, and then took a lot of Australian archetypal characters and cultural mythology, like Crocodile Dundee and Steve Irwin, and wove those characters into a combination to come up with the character. Let's start with Ivan Milotte, because he's the primary inspiration for Mick Taylor. Ivan Milotte exhibited psychopathic behavior from childhood, having allegedly chopped a dog in half with a machete and murdered a taxi driver before 17. Born in 1944, the 5th of 14 children in a violent household, Milotte kidnapped 2 18-year-old hitchhikers, raping one of them, in 1971. In that case, his lawyer got him off without him serving any time at all. Years later, backpackers began disappearing in Australia. Beginning in 1992 and throughout 1993, the backpackers' bodies were found in Belanglo State Forest. The corpses told a grisly tale. Some of the women had been stabbed as many as 14 times. One victim had been shot 10 times in the head, prompting investigators to believe that she'd been used for target practice. Most had suffered brutal beatings, and the women showed signs of sexual assault. Almost all had deep cuts to the back, which would have paralyzed them. That last detail is crucial. Almost all had deep cuts to the back, which would have paralyzed them, yes. McLean's gruesome touch in Wolf Creek was based on Milotte's actual MO. In the film, Mick paralyzes Liz by severing her spinal cord. That's not Hollywood invention. That's what Ivan Milotte actually did to his victims. Director Greg McLean confirmed that whole sequence is taken from the Milotte case. When I read that, I couldn't believe it. That's what he did to some of his victims, and that's probably some of the worst stuff I've heard my whole life. That's very real, which is even more disturbing. Milotte was finally caught because of a survivor. In November 1993, backpacker Paul Onions, 24, was hitchhiking in Australia when he was given a ride by a man who told him his name was Bill. When Bill pulled out a gun and rope, Paul managed to escape and flagged down another car. He reported it to police, but at the time they had no suspect. Years later, after the bodies were discovered in Belanglo Forest, Paul saw a photo of Ivan Milotte and immediately recognized him as Bill. His testimony was crucial in convicting Milotte. When Milotte's residence was searched, police found numerous items belonging to the 7 murdered backpackers, another element used in Wolf Creek, where Mick keeps trophies. Serial killer Ivan Milotte was convicted of the murders on July 27, 1996, and he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences. Even in prison, Milotte's depravity continued. While in prison, he cut off his little finger with a plastic knife, hoping to force the Australian courts to grant him an appeal. On October 27, 2019, at 4:07 a.m., the backpacker killer Millet died at the age of 74 as a result of oesophageal cancer, still claiming he was innocent of his crimes. Now, let's talk about Bradley John Murdoch, the other inspiration for Wolf Creek. Bradley John Murdoch was found guilty for the murder of English backpacker Peter Falconio in 2005. Falconio, a 28-year-old tourist whose body has still never been discovered, disappeared in Australia in July 2001. In 2001, two backpackers, Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees, were traveling on Stewart Highway towards Darwin. When they reached Barrow Creek, a mechanic named Bradley Murdoch managed to get them to pull over because he had convinced them that there were sparks coming from the exhaust of their van and that they needed to service it immediately. This is exactly how Mick operates in Wolf Creek, pretending to be a helpful mechanic to lure victims. While traveling with his girlfriend, Joanne Lees, the two were stopped by a stranger who indicated their car had been visibly malfunctioning. Lees said that when the two pulled over to investigate, the stranger brandished a gun. Lees managed to escape from the situation after being bound by tape and sexually assaulted. But Falconio was less fortunate. Peter's body has never been found. Joanne's testimony, combined with DNA evidence, convicted Murdoch. After a 2-month trial, he was found guilty in December 2005. The verdict by the jury was unanimous. Murdoch will serve at least 28 years of a life sentence. The similarities to Wolf Creek are striking. Both killers pretended to be helpful mechanics to lure victims. Both operated in remote areas of the Australian outback, where bodies are nearly impossible to find. Both kept trophies from their victims, and both targeted vulnerable tourists who were far from home. The film was ambiguously marketed as being based on true events, while its plot bore elements reminiscent of the real-life murders of backpackers by Ivan Milot in the 1990s and Bradley Murdoch in 2001, both of which McLean used as inspiration for the screenplay. But McLean was careful to make it clear this wasn't a documentary. The film is a composite, blending real crimes with fictional storytelling. Interestingly, the rock quarry where Mick's mining site is located was the site of a real-life murder, which stirred up controversy from the local residents who mistook the film as being based on that crime. And in Australia, the film opened on 151 cinemas on the 3rd of November 2005, excluding the Northern Territory, out of respect for the pending trial for the murder of Peter Falconio. Bradley Murdoch's trial was still ongoing, and authorities worried the film could influence the jury. Actor John Jarratt, who played Mick Taylor, went to disturbing lengths to prepare for the role. According to director McLean and others, Jarratt went to extremes in preparing for his role as Mick in a bid to emulate, as close as possible, the real-life serial killer, Ivan Milot. He spent significant time alone in the isolated outback and went for weeks without showering. So how accurate is Wolf Creek? The actual characters and the specific narrative events depicted in the film are completely fictional. Liz Hunter, Christy Earle, and Ben Mitchell were not real people, and what they experience in the film never happened in reality. However, the overall plot, tourists going missing in the outbreak due to their encounter with a killer, is loosely based on reality. The film's impact was enormous. It became a cult classic, spawned sequels and a TV series, and permanently changed how tourists view the Australian outback. Wolf Creek taps into a primal fear, being stranded in a remote location at the mercy of a psychopath, and the fact that it's based on real events makes it infinitely more terrifying. Australia's backpacker murder problem is real and ongoing. The vastness of the outback makes it the perfect place for killers to operate. As director Greg McLean said, "Look at how big Australia is. How do you find a body?" That's what Wolf Creek taps into. The country is so massive, so remote, that bodies can disappear forever. What makes the real stories behind Wolf Creek so disturbing is the mundane evil of it all. Ivan Milot and Bradley Murdoch weren't supernatural monsters. They were ordinary-looking men who exploited people's trust and vulnerability. They pretended to be helpful locals, offering assistance to stranded tourists. And by the time their victims realized the danger, it was too late. Paul Onions, who escaped from Ivan Milot, is a hero. His testimony put away one of Australia's most notorious serial killers. In Wolf Creek 2, the character Paul Hammersmith is loosely based on Paul Onions, though the film version is much darker. The real Paul escaped and immediately went to police. He can be proud that he helped catch a monster. So there you have it, The true story behind Wolf Creek. The film is fiction, but it's fiction inspired by horrifying reality. Ivan Mellet murdered at least 7 backpackers, though police suspect there may be more victims. Bradley Murdoch killed Peter Falconio and assaulted Joanne Lees. Both men exploited the vastness and isolation of the Australian outback to commit their crimes. And both inspired one of the most brutal horror films ever made. What do you think? Does knowing the true story make Wolf Creek more or less scary? And would you still backpack through the Australian outback after hearing these stories? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the true story behind Wolf Creek, hit that like button, subscribe for more horror movie true stories, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.